We got some big news out of Canada, Herc. John Herdman is moving on from the Canadian men's national team job, but he's not going all that far. He's going to take over TFC, who, of course, just parted ways recently with Bob Bradley. He took over the Canadian men's national team and took them to their first World Cup since 1986. Of course, before that was with the Canadian women's national team and took them to bronze medals in back-to-back Olympics. Herc, you have been a super fan of John Herdman. I almost feel like from day one. Let's start with the Canada side of this. Can the Canadian men's national team keep the good times rolling without their manager?
With the good manager, yes. Now, you need money to bring in a good manager. And I think that's part of the reason John Herdman left. The dysfunction that is Canadian soccer, this federation, didn't have enough money to put on September fixtures for their men's national team. Their women were protesting right before going to a World Cup. It's so dysfunctional. I understand why he's leaving. Like, I could see John Herdman saying, all right, it'd be cool to coach a World Cup in our country. That would be massive. That would be insane. I want to be part of that. But I see the writing in the wall. I see that it's going to be harder and harder for us to even prepare for these games. Let me just jump ship right now. Yeah, they're dysfunctional. Toronto FC is as dysfunctional, but they have deeper pockets. Maybe throughout that dysfunction, because of the money, because of the resources, I can mold this team in my image and be more successful, get something in the long term from it. I can see why he did it. But man, this just highlights how dysfunctional Canadian football is.
Yeah, but I mean, to the original point, Herc, you gave him so much credit throughout their qualifying run for how this team played. And at times, I think I would agree with you that they truly performed like a well-coached team should. They were better than the sum of their parts. They were more than the sum of their parts. Without him, can they continue to be a top CONCACAF in that conversation with the U.S., in that conversation with Mexico?
Like what? If I just pick the coach and say they can, like if they had Bob Bradley as the coach, could they still do what he did? Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
So you don't think Herdman was that special, really?
What do you mean? Why?
Well, you just think any manager can just come in and fix it. This is a guy who took them to their first World Cup in 36 years. I just told you,
if Bob Bradley. I didn't just say any manager. I said Bob Bradley. Bob Bradley's a proven coach, man, regardless of what you may think. And he's very similar in a lot of his ways to the John Herdman style, especially when it comes to culture and a lot of those playing systems that he employed. It makes sense for me that a guy like Bob Bradley would come in. Now, listen, this goes both ways. Bob Bradley or whoever the coach may be would have to come in and say, yes, I'm accepting these terms, and I understand that the limited resources we have going forward are what they are, and we can make it work going this way. But if you can't guarantee preparation games, where's the future for Canadian football? Where's the future for Canada soccer here? If you can't even organize friendlies, if you can't guarantee that they will have at their disposal proper opponents, like, it's a lose-lose for anybody who takes this job if something doesn't change.
What does John Herdman know, right? What does he know that's happening at Canadian soccer and the highest levels of Canadian soccer that he's walking away from a home World Cup and a second World Cup with a group that he clearly knows how to get the best of? That's what I would be asking. And whether it's Bob Bradley or anybody else, Herc, I wonder, to your point, just how attractive this job is going to be. If you're gonna mention Bob Bradley, I'll mention another name for you. Juan Carlos Osorio. That would be a guy who I think Canada would do well to look at.
For just shooting. What about Jesse Marsh for just shooting it then?
No. What about Toronto FC? Did they make the right hire here?
Oh, man. This is interesting, right? Because regardless if they made the right hire or not, and you can debate that because he's never really had a coaching resume to speak of when it comes to club teams and managing massive stars like Toronto has, complicated egos like Toronto has, a complicated situation like Toronto has today with Insigne, Bernadeschi, et cetera, remains to be seen. What I will say is Bill Manning's on the clock. Bill Manning, the president of Toronto, who's been there for the Greg Vannies, who's been there for the Bob Bradleys, who's been there and admitted that,
Sounds like the coaches are on the clock, not the president.
No, the president's on the clock because all these failures that he's had. And this is a man, an individual who's admitted to not knowing much about Lorenzo Insigne and getting his stats off transfer market. Like, you can have all the funds and resources in the world, but at the end of the day, the guy who's pulling the trigger, the guy who's making the deals happen is somebody like Bill Manning. It could only take you so far, regardless of who the coach is. So Bill Manning's on the clock.
No club experience? How big a worry is that?
The great thing that I thought John Herdman did in Canadian football and Canadian soccer with this Canadian men's national team is instilling a culture, something that was severely lacking for Canada. The culture right now within that locker room is rot for Toronto FC. If he can change the culture, he can make it a winning culture once again. I don't worry too much about the club situation and his experience in that.
What about these big egos? They didn't respect Bob Bradley, who had a much, to your point, longer resume when it came to club success than John Herdman. If the Bernadeskis of the world, if the Insignes of the world didn't respect Bob Bradley, how are they going to get along with John Herdman?
It's a Bill Manning problem.
Well, thank you very much for watching ESPN on YouTube. For more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app. And for live streaming, premium content, and let's not forget as well, ESPN FC 7 days a week. Subscribe to ESPN+.